bar there. Just, and then
okay,
there's like Helena wants to watch, but she doesn't know where to watch.
She doesn't know where. Okay, so I'm going to have to close. I don't have multiple monitors, so I'm going to just shrink you for a second and then figure out what the watch link is. Okay. And then I guess I should post it on.
So we're live already. We're live already.
Yeah, that's okay. This is the watch link. And does Alana think that I ought to post it on G+?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah. Or if you could post it in here too, in the side chat.
Okay, so first I'm going to post it on, so I'll just call it watch link Ozzy Helena. Uh-oh, yeah. So clearly I pulled a Mouty. All right, so here, I'm going to put it on G+, paste. There's the watch link right there. Share. Okay, and then going back, I have to come down here in order to get back to us. And then to post it in here, paste. That should be the watch link. Okay, so, all right. Hi, Gus, I'm glad you came. How are you?
Hello, Gus.
I can't believe it. Gus is speechless.
Oh, no, fine.
Okay, so, all right, so, Ozzy. You know I've been struggling with moral realism for a long time, especially your little version of it, right? So, but I think maybe I have a clincher. So just to sort of frame it, last night I kind of tried to bring it up, but we had a lot of people and they were very interested and we didn't get down to really talking about it. But it was sort of about the underlying assumption that you're making with respect to flourishing, right, or eudaimonia, right? Mm-hmm. And so, well, let me see. I will try to summarize and then if I'm wrong, at least with the summary, you can sort of correct me.
Yeah.
So underlying your entire moral realism schema is this assumption that that flourishing is really all about what moral discourse. Moral discourse is all about flourishing, and so. There's two sort of pieces of evidence that led me to think that that's what you're thinking. The first one was last night when you said, actually at rock bottom it's really about flourishing, and I said, well, but that's just an assumption, and therefore could, in one way or another, at least be considered arbitrary. And you were like, whoa, 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 it's not arbitrary, right? This is empirical. This really is at the bottom of moral discourse, and in fact, even moral behaviors. And so you said, first of all, sort of look at the way people behave when they're engaged in moral discourse or moral reasoning as a piece of evidence. And the other piece of evidence was somebody imagine some kind of society where, at root, the morality of that society was not about flourishing. So is that good enough so far to sort of summarize why you think that the underpinning of flourishing is real?
Yeah, I mean that's a good first approximation. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can
okay.
Zero in further on that. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a very simple objection I've got. I mean, I've got several objections, but this one is the one I want to talk about now. And it's just basically that it seems as though that is not exactly an empirical claim. It seems as though, in fact, here's my big sort of gotcha, right? So here's my big, bold-ass claim.
Okay.
I think that really at root you've got a faith-based system going.
Okay.
Okay? And it's because of this assumption thing. Because you're claiming it's empirical. But really, you have arranged it so that any time you look at a moral discourse or a person doing moral reasoning or two people fighting or somebody trying to act in a moral way, it can be construed to be at root about flourishing. So you've got an unfalsifiable thing that you're claiming is empirical.
I see, yeah. I can see
So
why.
it's not, it's not set up in a way that it can even be falsified. It's kind of like, this will to power versus altruism, or, is really everything selfish or not? It's that kind of a thing.
Right.
So that's sort of what's really one of the things that's driving me to be in opposition. And I think that, and I've heard J.D. Kane bring it up, and I think that that's sort of what he's getting at when he says to you, yeah, but Ozzy, I'd like to throw in with moral realism, but if somebody has an assumption about what morality is all about that is different from the one entailed in Ozzy's version of moral realism, there's nothing I can really do about that, other than try to convince them in the normal way. And I think that that may be sort of at root to what JD is trying to get at, and maybe what I object to.
Okay, I understand the objection. It's a good objection, actually. There's a slight clarification there. When I said that it was empirical, I didn't mean that my claim that eudaimonia, or the concept of well-being and flourishing, is at the bottom of our concept of morality. But that's an empirical claim. I in fact think it is, but that's not what I was talking about at the time. I was talking about that I was challenging your claim that it was somehow arbitrary, and there I was saying no, that it's not arbitrary. It's an empirical claim that it's not arbitrary. That's what I was saying there. With respect to the sort of the unfalsifiability and the conceptual nature of it, what we're talking about here is a semantical argument. Okay, if we want to talk about morality, hang on a second, I'm getting noticed my wife or something's wrong. Did we lose audio or something?
Your sound is muddy.
My sound is muddy?
Very. Very bad.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me just check my mic here. Is this better? We'll see. There's a little bit of
Not really. Not really. Your sound is really coming through. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you got Charlie Brown's
I can
teacher
do?
disease. No, there's nothing you can do, Helena.
Nothing I
Okay,
can do.
I have an idea. Hang on, let me draw some bandwidth here. And Helena, I think it might have been that we're both sharing this bandwidth that's causing the problem. Okay, let me throttle the old bandwidth here. All right, can you hear me any better now, or is it,
No, it's about the same.
Okay, hang on a second. I'm just going to ask my wife to drop.
If we all go to picture instead of live feed, would that?
Helena, can you drop
It's,
that?
Helena, it's got nothing to do with you.
Okay.
Somebody else will tell me.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, how's my audio sounding now?
It's a little better, but not much.
Okay, hang on a second. I'm going to get my wife to drop off. We're on the same connection here, and she's been watching live, so that might have been a problem. Hang on, I'm just going to leave and rejoin. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sorry about this.
That's all right.
I didn't want to say anything earlier because I didn't want him to leave because I know you were talking to him. So.
Well, I can't hear what you hear. He sounds fine to me.
You can't.
That's why I think. Well, he doesn't sound choppy to me.
Well, it's not choppy. It's just it's very muffled. I mean, and if his own wife is telling him that it's
Right.
I don't think it's me. I think you've done something to your mic.
Yeah, Ozzy.
Yeah, Ozzy.
Mike doing thing.
Oh my God, I've been fighting with YouTube this whole time. I was going to jot down notes and everything, but no. So, Ozzy, do you want me to click on something that you just popped something?
Just no, I don't know what happened there. I just got this weird message.
Your sound is a little better in terms of force, but you're just a bit crackly.
I'm a bit crackly. Okay, hang on a second. Alana, are
Actually,
you still watching?
you're doing pretty good. You're doing good.
We're doing good now? Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, much better, much better.
Okay.
Okay, so to bring us back. So yesterday I said, oh, but your assumption is just that. It's an assumption. And, there's no grounding for it and you can't prove it and blah, blah, blah. And you were like, whoa, wait. It's more than an assumption. It's really true. And I was like, okay. And you said, because look at the way people are when they discuss morality. And also, can anyone think of a society where flourishing was not at the bottom? That's kind of a society wouldn't last very long at all. I mean, maybe, fractions of seconds.
No, I didn't say that. I did say that last part.
Okay.
I don't think that society sort of hinges on this. I think that's a separate question.
Okay.
I think one can imagine a species where the organisms were not bent on flourishing and eudaimonia, and that such a society could exist. I mean, you can just, look at ants, look at bees. But they're different kind of species. But so it's not necessary for survival that we have this.
Okay.
Okay. So my view is this. When you are looking at a moral system and you're trying to sort of get at, sort of what at bottom is morality about, you have to start from what people are talking about. You have to listen carefully to moral discourse. You have to attend to what the concerns are, right? Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, you'll notice when people are talking about morality, they are invariably talking about agents. They're talking about actions. They're talking about conscious sentient beings. They're not concerned about what the trees are trying to do or wanting to do. They're not. Trees and rocks are not the objects of our moral concern. We're not worried about how it feels for a tree or how it feels for a rock. We'd have to come to believe that there's something that it's like to be a tree or be a rock for us to be concerned about them. So we're concerned with agents, and we are concerned with sentient beings that can be the objects of our moral concern. We're concerned with, and when we're concerned with agents, it means we're concerned with actions, not just behaviors. I mean, a plant can have behavior. A Venus flytrap has behaviors, right? But it doesn't engage in actions, right? It can't deliberate between possible courses of action. So any theory of morality has to be sensitive to the fact that that's what we're talking about. Those kinds of issues are the kinds of things that we're talking about. And we're not just talking about preferences either. A lot of people like to sort of suggest that morality devolves down to the subject of individual subjective preferences. This is just the way I like it. That's the way you like it. Rape's not wrong. I just happen to dislike rape. I happen to dislike being raped.
Right, and you think that your system really shows someone who believes that it really boils down to preferences, that person is literally incorrect.
Yeah. Now, see, when you look at how people talk about morality, you'll notice that they talk about their preferences and they talk about their moral values rather differently. If you and I get into a disagreement about pizza toppings, your favorite pizza toppings versus my favorite pizza toppings, I don't get morally indignant about your pizza toppings.
Sure.
No matter
absolutely.
how much I like pineapple pizza,
yes.
No matter how much you think it's ridiculous, we're not going to sort of get heated, and there's just no indignation that arises out of those kinds of conversations.
Absolutely, and I'm totally willing to grant that.
Right. No, I know you would grant that. This is for the purposes of people who are listening.
Okay.
For me to sort of get at any moral theory has to account for the way we talk about morality, as opposed to how we talk about other things that involve values. Right.
Okay.
Moral values are a kind of value. They're specifically moral values. But what are moral values? What is the concern of moral values, right? And yesterday when we were talking, we talked about this idea of medicine, for instance. What is the object of medicine? What is the object of primary concern in medicine? It's this concept of health. Health is an open-ended concept, right? We don't know everything that constitutes health. We have some idea of what health is, and with time we discover more and more about what constitutes health. What's included properly under the heading of health, and so we have to discover what the subject of medicine is. We literally discover what the subject of medicine is, and similarly, we discover what the subject of morality is. We can be radically wrong about what health is, and we have in the past been radically wrong about what health is.
Right.
And no doubt future generations will look back on us with some amusement on what we think.
Yeah, I can't believe they thought chemotherapy was the only answer, that kind of thing.
Right. That this was
the way we look at bleeding. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The way we look at leeching, bleeding people and stuff like that, or various psychiatric treatments and things like that.
Yeah.
And the same thing I think will prove true with morality. So I think in the case of morality, I think that there are actual features of the world that are empirical, objective features of the world that are the object of concern when it comes to morality. Okay, and those objects of concern have to do with the predictable consequences of our actions upon the well-being and the happiness or flourishing, broadly construed, of these sentient well-beings, of these sentient beings. Okay, that I think is what we're talking about. And when you look, so in other words, when you're looking at different moral systems, you want to say, well, listen, what's right and wrong? Well, it depends on what you think the ultimate concern is of morality. If you think the ultimate concern of morality is pleasing God, doing that which is in accordance with God, then what properly belongs under the heading of right and wrong depends entirely on what the will of God is. Okay.
Yeah.
So that if you start with that determines what right and wrong is. If you start with the greatest good for the greatest number, or some kind of utilitarian principle, okay, then that's going to determine a completely different set of moral propositions that properly belong under the headings of right and wrong. And similarly with my view, or the virtue ethics view, a eudaimonian ethics, right? If you start with the concept of flourishing and well-being being as the bottom central concern of morality, then that's going to dictate a completely different set of outcomes for what properly belongs under the headings of right and wrong. And so your concern is, well, wait a minute, we've got these competing ideas about what is at the bottom of morality.
Yes.
How do you decide which is which? Is this not just arbitrary, which starting point? And I think, no, it's not. And now I'm going to say why I am, but my wife is trying to convey something to me. Just a moment.
Okay.
Apparently I need to increase my video quality. I look like I'm all out of focus or something. There we go. So, someone doesn't like what I look like. Big surprise. Okay.
I have, just as a real quick aside, I've got to go steal my kid's laptop for this in order to do come on camera. And even when I do that, right, there's only one setting available, and that's it's called exposure. And I've got it all the way down. Nonetheless, it's all white and glowy. And if I try to turn off the lights or wait till nighttime, the choice is either black or sort of this bizarre white thing. So I don't know why I brought that up. Just to say,
you're just glowing from an inner light. That's all it is.
Okay. All right. Anyway, let's go on.
Okay. All right. So now, how do we adjudicate between these competing starting points, right? What do moral philosophers do when they bump up against each other and they have opposing views about what the ultimate concern is that governs our moral reasoning, or that ought to be governing our moral reasoning? Okay. Well, obviously you look at if you can sort of derive contradictions, or if there's something incoherent in somebody's view, then of course it goes off the table. It's a non-starter. If they've got a concern, though, that they think is at the bottom, which flies in the face of how ordinary people talk, then I think it's off the table. Okay, so there's a semantic argument here. This is a conceptual issue. Okay, we want to make sure that when we're talking about morality, that we're talking about morality, that we're talking about what people think that they're talking about. Okay.
Okay.
Preferences are not what we're talking about. Because if you just look at how people are talking, you can see that it's not talk about preferences. So preferences, I think, is just sort of off the table. A kind of naive relativism has to be sort of ruled out, because anybody who insists that it's all about preferences is simply ignoring how people behave, how they talk, right? Even a moral relativist behaves completely differently when it comes to moral propositions, as opposed to ordinary preferences like pizza toppings and their favorite movie and stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah.
They themselves belie that they don't actually believe what they say they believe. That this is the charge of fictionalism Okay, that they're adopting a position that is fictional, that they themselves don't even hold to. Okay, and I think that's true for most.
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I don't want to throw them out.
Well, I think there are some versions of relativism that I think can hold up, but you know, the workaday ones that we hear most of the time, I think are just sort of can be ruled out just by you can just sort of point to the hypocrisy and no,
Fuck.
Jesus Christ.
That was a loud dog. All right, so how do you adjudicate these things? You have to make sure that you're talking about what people are talking about. And so the way that you have to do that is you have to make sure that anything that is put forward as a moral proposition and gets genuinely debated as a moral proposition and evaluated as a moral proposition lines up with the clear cases and the unclear cases. So what do I mean by that? Okay, whenever we're talking about we're having a moral dispute with someone, okay, even if there's some vast gulf between us in our moral positions, there's usually cases where we will agree where, yeah, we would agree, perhaps for different reasons, we would agree that such and such is wrong, that wanton cruelty is wrong, the rape of children is wrong, right? Mass killing and indiscriminate killing is wrong. Destroying other people's property is wrong. Most of the time people will agree, even if they disagree for different reasons. You have to sort of look at the clear cases, the things that we would all genuinely agree on, and say, yeah, this strikes us as right. This strikes us as a virtue, right? We agree that we like and prefer and honor and respect people who are honest, people who are courageous, people who are patient, people who are cooperative, all of the things that we would call the virtues, right? And we despise all the people that embody the vices, right? Things like people who are dishonest, people who are uncooperative, people who defraud people who are intolerant, people who are closed-minded, and things like that, right? We don't like those kinds of people. We like certain kinds of other people, right? If you look at the kinds of things that people actually agree on of what constitutes a good person or a good action, and there's plenty of evidence of where we agree, right? I mean, even cross-culturally and cross-culturally across time, okay, there's an enormous amount of agreement, right?
Yes.
Okay, that I think is sort of the basic data that you look at and you go, okay, now, what do these things have in common? Then you look at the cases where people would agree these are terrible things, these are vices, these are pernicious acts, these are horrible things, I wouldn't want to live in that world. And then you look at all the muddy cases, all the gray cases, all the hard cases where we are kind of divided, okay? This is the raw data that you look at, and when you try to figure out, is what I am putting forward as the rock bottom concern of morality, does that concern that I'm putting forward, does that explain or line up with the cases, the clear cases of yes, this is good, the clear cases of no, this is bad, and does it explain why there's some gray? And I think that a concept like flourishing and well-being lines up very well with that. Okay, so it's a semantic argument. In other words, putting forward the concept of well-being and flourishing as the candidate, the best candidate among others, is merely saying that this candidate, as the proper object of moral concern, of ultimate moral concern, is the one that best captures all of our moral talk. It best captures all those occasions where we agree, cross-culturally and across time, and across situations, and it captures, it explains why we disagree, where the gray areas are. So that is how I think that it has to be done, and that I think is an empirical issue. That I think is sort of something that is fact-based. You have to sort of look carefully. You have to sort of analyze what people agree on, what they disagree on, and where the gray areas are, where they fight and combat. And then you have to look at the concept that they're putting forward as the ultimate moral concern and ask yourself, does this in fact better capture the pattern that we see of agreement and disagreement and conflict? Does it better capture that than some other competing idea of the ultimate object of moral concern, like a utilitarian definition or what God wants or something like that.
Okay, so the case you're making now is much less strong. And if really you just want to make the case that it's a better way to look at things, then
not a
obviously,
better way. It's not just a better way. I think that's a little bit sort of disparaging way of putting it.
Yeah, I don't mean to be disparaging, but it really does seem to be the only thing you can legitimately argue. Because yes, you're saying, well, look around. Obviously, people are only ever talking about flourishing. However, any kind of argument, if it can be construed to, at root, be about flourishing, means that the theory with respect to flourishing isn't a very good theory.
I could say,
right? So
I could make the same argument about health. I can make the same argument about health and medicine.
Okay, tell me. Okay, all right. So hold on. Before you go into sort of explaining health, let's see if my objection has any really decent weight, right? So I think that at bottom you have this assumption, which is that you believe that empirically any kind of moral reasoning and any kind of moral thought, moral discussion can be revealed as ultimately at bottom being about flourishing,
right.
Or and just to use the shorthand, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you want to use that as a real theory, in other words, if you want to really claim that that's empirical, you've got to have a falsifiability to it, right? So that would mean that either you think it's completely universal, in which case it could be falsified, right? Or if, in fact, it is literally falsified, in other words, we can find circumstances in our real world, right? Not sort of the kinds of things people were thinking of with like other planets and, creatures that exist for milliseconds because they're interested in self-destruction, that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Not that, right? But in our real world, if you find people who, in your opinion, let's just say, genuinely are not striving for flourishing, you could say that no, it's not that they don't think flourishing is most important. It's just that they're mistaken about what kinds of things would lead to flourishing. Well, if you can do that with your theory, then you've got a kind of faith-based theory, right? By which you can take any situation and just construe it to fit a pattern that would confirm the theory that in fact at root it's about flourishing.
Yeah, there's a perfect analogy.
There's a real problem with that, in that you've got at root literally an assumption that cannot be falsified, because any situation can just be, oh look, don't you see, that's really about flourishing. Oh look, that one, that's really about flourishing. So it's akin to, in my opinion, it's akin to the sort of, there's no real altruism, it's actually selfishness.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
That kind of a thing, right? It's similar to that kind of a thing. So
no, it's identical to that. It's, your allegation is it's identical. It's exactly the same kind of situation. Right?
Yeah, under my allegation, maybe it is exactly the same. I haven't really analyzed if it's exactly the same, but let's assume it's exactly the same as far as the way I'm interpreting what you're doing.
Okay, right? I love this objection. It's a really good objection.
Yeah, so that means that you've got at bottom an assumption that you are only claiming is empirical, but it doesn't stand up to typical empirical tests because there is no falsifiability to it.
Okay, yeah, I disagree with that. Okay, but first let me flesh out for anyone who's watching the analogy with altruism. There are a lot of people out there who are sort of cynics with respect to altruism. They'll say that there's really no such thing as genuine altruism, a genuine case of self-sacrifice and putting the interests of another person ahead of your own, because even a person who seemingly puts another person's welfare ahead of their own is actually doing so because it is gratifying to them. it so happens that they love that other person or whatever, or they hold to some ideal that they should be self-sacrificing and altruistic, and they're trying to live up to that, and that makes them feel good. And so ultimately, whenever a person appears to be altruistic, they are ultimately just satisfying themselves. Right? They are ultimately being selfish. Okay, and of course, the objection, and it's a good objection to that, is, well, wait a minute, that's completely unfalsifiable. What you're doing there is you are simply insisting that at bottom there just has to be some selfish motivation, and the problem with that is you have to demonstrate that that is the motivation. Right? I mean, what reason is there for thinking that that is the motivation, right?
So you've explained my position really well and very charitably.
Okay, so now why do I think it's disanalogous? Okay, in the case of the altruism case, when you ask people, well, why did you do it? And they say, well, I did it because I love this person, and I love them so much that I actually care more about them than me, and I would die for my children. I would gladly die for my children if I had to. Right? I would rather not die for my children.
I would die for my kid without even a question. It would just be a no-brainer.
Right. Exactly. Now, the person who believes that altruism is ultimately it's what's called psychological egoism. The person who's a psychological egoist or an ethical egoist is going to say, no, ultimately, no, Helena, it's got to be the case that it's because it would cause you greater pain not to do it, and and that has to be the ultimate motivation.
Okay, so if I can interrupt really quick before you explain why it's disanalogous, right? Let me put forward to you an analogy, and so that at least the audience or whoever might be watching can see where I'm going, and then you can continue with chopping it down. So, for example, I would say that I don't mean to pick on the religious, so all the religious people. This is just an example, right? But right, so there might be someone who thinks, look, flourishing is great, but really ultimately, what's the most important thing is making sure that your behaviors glorify God. So if you encounter a situation where your internal instincts or what have you tell you to do one thing, but you know that in order to glorify God, you should do another thing. Your decision should be to do the other thing. Now, to me, that goes against your assumption. Nonetheless, to me, it seems as though you would reinterpret that to say, no, actually, that really is actually really, really, really about flourishing, even though maybe they're talking about flourishing in an afterlife or some sort of thing. Right? So that's what I mean by it's analogous, or perhaps, as you suggested, maybe I think it's exactly the same.
Right. Okay. Well, you've anticipated my answer there. That's really good. So in the case of the altruism case, my objection would be, well, wait a minute. You're simply declaring that at bottom the actions have to be selfish. That's exactly. Only that.
So you understand, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So that's what it seems like you want to do.
Right. In the case of flourishing, though, I think that there's an independent reason for thinking why what motivates us is a desire to flourish. Okay.
Okay.
If you look at human actions, I mean, you'll see that what drives us ultimately, like all organisms, is our biological imperatives. Right. We're sort of concerned with the basic needs of survival. Okay. But above and beyond that, once those are met, we then concern ourselves with all kinds of other things. We concern ourselves with feeling safe, with having friends, enjoying good company,
the whole
having a satisfying romantic life and stuff like that. We concern ourselves with satisfying work and gratifying work, right?
Okay.
We seem to sort of, if you look at what people are actually concerned with, if you look at everything that they value in life seems to be in service of making them happy, and not necessarily happy right here and right now, right? Because everyone would just be running around shooting up heroin if all they wanted to do was be maximally ecstatic.
We don't have to bother with hedonism. I get that. Yeah.
So what people are concerned with is having a happy life. What they want is the good life. They want to live the best possible life that they could have. That is exactly what the concept of flourishing is about. It's having.
But Ozzy, you are just insisting.
Yeah, I don't think I'm insisting. I think that you can't find a counterexample.
Well,
That's the
what
problem.
about my glory to God example? You're going to say it doesn't count because at the bottom of it, it's literally about flourishing if you really look.
Well, hang on a second. In the case of someone who wants to offer the glorification of God as the ultimate value, I can point to all kinds of cases where people are simply not busy with trying to glorify God. Practically everything I do is clearly not intended to be glorifying God. I mean, any theist who thinks that the ultimate moral concern is the glorification of God will look at me and say, well, that guy Ozzy is not doing a very good job of glorifying God. Okay.
So
And
I'm missing the connection you're making.
Okay. Well, there are the claim that what people really are concerned about in moral talk is the glorification of God is everywhere falsified practically.
No,
there are a few people who are in the business of glorifying God, but if you look at what actually concerns us, you'll see that most people don't seem to be in the business of glorifying God.
Okay. All right. Let me try to approach it from the opposite way. Okay. What would it take to falsify your theory that at root it's relishing? Because the examples that we came up with were the examples that people came up with when you offered, well, somebody tell me an example, right? You seemed, and this is just a guess because I really didn't get into it with you because there were people who were sort of new and all that stuff, right? So I thought at first, well, I could offer lots of things. The glory to God is just one of them, and you would agree, right? But in fact, no, you wouldn't. You would say, no, Helena, don't you see? The glory to God people are really ultimately talking about flourishing. And you could say that with any reasonable other system that has as its underlying assumption something other than flourishing. So I would ask you, what would falsify this underlying theory that you've got?
Yeah, it would be easy.
Or reasonably falsify it.
It would be trivially easy. You would just have to point to people.
Okay, all right, tell me.
You would just have to point to people who are very clearly living their lives in ways that clearly they are not trying to live happy lives. Point to someone who's not trying to maintain the good conditions they have and improve those conditions and is working to make their conditions more miserable.
It seems as though regardless of who I point to, you would go, don't you see? I can construe that.
Try me.
Okay. Okay. People who, so let's take, a really hyperbolic view of ISIS. There's one. So people who think that really what we need to do because God said so, for example. Just for example, theists, I'm sorry to be doing that to you, but just for example, we need to kill all these 50,000 people who disagree with us. Mm-hmm. And you're going to say, actually, from their point of view, they think that that's an issue of flourishing. So, but they're just wrong.
Well, no, they don't think it's an issue of flourishing. No, wait, hang on. We got to be careful here. They don't think of it as an issue of flourishing, right? But right. I would argue that they are still acting in the interests that what ultimately motivates them is a desire to have the best possible life. It's just that what they think constitutes the best possible life is drastically different from what I think the best possible life is, and I think that they are, just as they think of me, that we think one another are mistaken about what constitutes the best possible life. Nevertheless, they are striving for the best possible life. They just think that the best possible life isn't to be had here; it's to be had in some other metaphysical realm. What you do here is what is going to determine your ultimate fate in that other realm. But you want to make sure that you end up in heaven, not in hell. If they're striving for heaven and trying to avoid hell, mm-hmm. It's because they want the best possible life that they can have. Right? Sure.
And you can construe anything I bring up in that way.
It's not construing. You can ask
people.
It
is construing. This is the difference.
You can ask them. Ask people.
And you think it's somehow empirical. But if you don't have a really good way in real life,
I have a simple way.
Okay, let's hear it.
You ask them. This is I actually mentioned this in a comment. I think to you today. Was it earlier today? Or maybe it was in an answer to you a comment yesterday. Where I said when you press people on this, when you press people on why they should obey God, why should they care what they will tell you, right? Mm-hmm. God will punish you if you don't, right?
Yeah.
You were built, right, in the image of God. The imago Dei is such that you will not be as happy unless you are doing God's work. If only you were doing God's work, you would see that that is the happier life. You could be poor, you could even be friendless. But if you were doing God's work, you would ultimately be happier, and you would be rewarded, which would be even more, make you even more happy in heaven, right?
Right.
So when you ask them, so this is not me simply stipulating that they are after the good life. When you press people on these reasons that they say are the ultimate good, they always come back, invariably, right out of their own mouths with why it is in your best interest and why you would be happier and why it is a better way to live. Right? It would be a better existence for you. Right?
Yes, so please.
I am taking people at their word when they say this is. I don't know why you would laugh there. I am literally taking people at their word.
The reason I'm laughing is because I really promote taking people at their word, right? So I have to fight a lot of this psychoanalysis BS. And so here you are throwing that at me, right? So
I see. Okay.
I'd kind of laugh too because I'm kind of the opposite, but you know,
okay.
For me.
Well, I take people at their word. I mean, of course, people can be deluded and mistaken about what their own motivations and interests are. But I think when you ask people why they want heaven, or you ask people why they want to live according to the hedonic calculus or utilitarian calculus, or according to some deontological principle, what they always come back with, what is the ultimate reason why they value those things, why that is supposed to be the operative principle, is that it always turns out there's a deeper principle. The deeper principle is that this will make for a better existence.
Wait, is there a predictive nature to it? Like if you, what I see is, I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but it seems like it's always a post hoc. You're always behind the 8-ball explaining someone's motivation. You're never behind the cue ball explaining it.
I mean, when it comes to explaining motivations, it's always a matter of ascribing content, right? Whenever there's two ways to sort of approach motivation. You can just ask a person what their motivation is, or if they're not forthcoming, or if you have some reason to think that they're lying or deluded or something like that, then you have to ascribe, based on their behavior, globally speaking, what is actually motivating them, right? I mean, we do this all the time. You look at an animal, you can't tell you what its motivations are. It can't tell you, right? Your dog can't tell you what its motivations are, but you have to infer its motivations. You have to ascribe beliefs and perceptual states and memories and drives and emotional states in your dog to figure out what is motivating it minute by minute, right? So I mean, if I grab the car keys and my dog gets all excited, I just like that, I know what's motivating it. It thinks it's going to go for a drive, and I know that my dog loves going on a drive, and it always gets excited in the past whenever I grab the car keys and so forth, right? And we do this for people all the time. We are mind readers. We are constantly ascribing intentional content, mental content. We are ascribing mental states, belief states, perceptual states, emotional states, states of desire, biological drives and interests to people all the time. So there's nothing illicit about ascribing and attributing motivations to people.
No, not necessarily.
We do it all the time. It is literally impossible not to do it.
That explains why I laughed, because yes, we do it all the time, and in my opinion, it's a mistake to do. I think that really you should trust the person who tells you that what they think is really what they think.
Well, can I tell you a really
interesting that you brought that up?
Can I tell you a really quick story about trusting people? What they think is what they think.
Yes.
I wish to God I could remember which state had this gubernatorial election, exactly what year it was. But I remember reading an anecdote about a professor of sociology who brought forth that one of your states down there in the last 10 years had a gubernatorial election, and as an experiment, a colleague of his sent out a legion of what could best be described as pretty young girls with clipboards to do exit polls. And won't you find it strange? And lo and behold, not a single Republican emerged from any of those polls that was covered by the pretty girls who went and did the exit polls. And of course the implication being essentially what happened, the best that they could figure, is that guys, particularly guys, don't like to tell pretty girls they're Republicans because they think it makes them mean. And that's
what?
And that's one little story, but I mean there's others. For instance, there's a political polling company up here in Canada, in our western provinces. They recently had an election, a provincial election, and a couple of our political polling companies, one in particular, really dropped the ball because, as far as they were concerned, an emergent political party called the White Rose Party was supposed to clean up, and they didn't get a single vote, not one. And so, personally, for that and for a number of other reasons, I think there are a very rare set of circumstances, I think, where you can believe everything a person tells you at face value.
Nobody.
Nobody's
saying that.
I honestly think, I honestly would go as far as to say that just about the only, like I said, except for a very small set of circumstances, I think the only way that you can truly figure out a human's motivation is by watching what they do, not asking them.
Gus, hang on. Nobody is suggesting that you sort of credulously accept whatever a person offers.
Nor am I saying that anybody here has. I just.
Well, no, you said always in your.
Which part? Because I had a long part.
Oh, well, right near the end, I actually tried to interrupt there to say, wait, nobody's saying that. That was when you said it, but I don't remember the exact sentence now. But
I said I myself would be, I would find it like I mean, everybody's going to do things differently, but from my point of view, from what I've seen, it's except for a rare set of circumstances, you almost always have to watch what they do rather than listen to what they tell you.
Okay, well, what people tell you is just another data point, okay, in the ascription of mental content.
Only if it's correct.
Right. It's another data point. Okay.
How can it be a point of data if it's incorrect?
Well, data doesn't
data doesn't have to be. Data doesn't always point to the right conclusion. Sometimes data points to the wrong conclusion.
Take That's why you need a lot of data. Other things, including how they behave, right?
That's
and then
right.
you can help. It's something that will help you decide.
That's right. Yeah. So when Helen and I are saying that we like to take people at face value, what we mean is that barring some good reason to think a person is being insincere or deluded, we take what they say at face value, right?
Right.
It's a ceteris paribus clause. It's everything else being equal. That is, under conditions where we don't have any reason to be suspicious of what they're telling. I mean, there are lots of cases where we have reason to think that a person is lying. There are lots of cases where we have a reason to think that a person is completely deluded or completely narrowly mistaken about some little thing, right? Or completely deluded in their outlook, right? In what their own motivations are, right? We've all known people who, I don't know, because they're jealous, exhibit hostility towards another person, and we know that they're so damn jealous that they're not actually disliking this person for the reason they said, but it's because they're jealous, and they're not actually approving of some other person because they think that the person did a good thing or said a smart thing, but because they're just crazy about them romantically or something like that, right? We're sort of all alive to that. It's just when we say that we think that it's important to take people at their word, it's so that we don't make the mistake of assuming that people think the way we do. There's a tendency, I mean, one thing that I sort of encounter all the time in the great debate community is people, especially secularists, assuming that the religious can't possibly believe what they say they believe. And that, I think, is a failure of imagination on the part of those of us who sort of tumbled out of our faith.
But you can understand why they might say that, though, couldn't you, Ozzy?
Well, yeah, of course I can. It's just
after all, we've got a Judeo-Christian Bible that says that you're supposed to stone adulterers. When was the last time you attended an adultery stoning? And that's just one example, right?
No, but not everyone believes everything that is in the Bible, and not everyone is a literalist about the Bible, right? I'll give you an example. I mean, I'll give you a common example.
But does anybody in North America stone adulterers?
Well, no, but they can't get away with it. I mean, there are theonomists and dominionists and Christian Reconstructionists in North America who tomorrow would be stoning people if they could impose the kind of theocracy that they're thirsting after, right? There are people who would be killing homosexuals simply for the crime of being homosexuals, and for no other reason than that, if they could get away with it, right?
Not to scream the argument down a strange hole, but that does actually happen. But
what happens?
And people are being killed in North America for the high crime and misdemeanor of being homosexual.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about fag bashing here. I'm talking about people who would set up a judicial system with a magistrate who would adjudicate in these matters and legally execute people for the crime of homosexuality or the crime of blasphemy.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to quibble us away from the central point. So
yeah. So first, I just want to welcome Fabio, and second, I'd like to ask Ozzy to present to me a condition that would falsify your claim that this underlying assumption is in fact factual.
Yeah, find me a person who invariably works to immiserate himself or herself. Right now, you'll say, "Well, I can't find such a person." Well, that's not a problem with my position. That the facts happen to accord with it. Right? I don't think you're going to be able to find such a person. Right? If my claim is precisely that this is a universal, fundamental motivation, of course you're going to find it everywhere, and of course you're going to have a hard time finding an actual falsifier. If I could find a falsifier, it would be falsified, and I wouldn't believe it. But I don't think I'm merely stipulating or declaring that people have this as a fundamental concern that ultimately undergirds all their moral motivations and moral reasoning. I have arrived at this by asking people. Just ask people why what they think is the fundamental moral concern is the fundamental moral concern, and they invariably refer to how it makes for a better existence.
But if somebody
it sometimes takes roundabout, sometimes takes a bit of interrogation for them to get there, but they will usually get there.
Right. So you can convince them that that's sort of at root what they're really talking about.
Well, I mean, it's actually happened. I mean, where I've had a conversation with people, and they will insist up and down that the ultimate moral concern is pleasing God, and then you find out, you ask them, well, why is it important to please God? Right? Not why do you want to please God, but
right.
Why is it even important to please God? And they'll say, well, that's what God wants. Yeah, but okay, well then why should anyone be concerned about what God wants? And move in that direction. And then you find out, oh well, it's because it's in your interest to do so. You'll be punished if you don't, rewarded if you do. Or, which I think is kind of a silly carrot and stick motivation, but a lot of them will say, well, no, it's even deeper than that. It's you are created in the image of God, and consequently, you can't even be fully what you are. You are not fully actualized and reaching your full potential unless you are acting in accordance with the will of God. Only when you are fully acting in accordance with the will of God are you doing that for which you were made. Right? So they have this sort of teleological goal in mind. They imagine that your hands are for grasping, your eyes are for seeing, and your mind is for certain things, including loving your neighbor, loving your children, and loving your God, and worship and veneration. And if you're not worshiping and venerating, you are missing something important that would make you happy, just like you are missing something if you go through life and you never love another person. Right?
Was there some reason? Was there some a good reason that what I put on the side there? You'd rule out someone under the guise of demon possession that would want suffering only to themselves and to everyone else.
I'm sorry, I didn't see what you wrote on the side there.
It was demon possession. If under my view, I don't think someone's actually possessed by a demon, but they're in their own head that that's what I'm taking them on, that they think they are.
Mhm.
And they're wanting suffering not only for themselves, but for everyone around them, and as many people as possible.
Yeah. So
Is
what
there some
about?
reason you would rule them out from the flourishing?
Um, I would certainly say that if a person actually believed that they were a demon and they deserved to suffer, and they systematically sought out to immiserate themselves, then I would say, yeah, those people. That's a wonderful counterexample of someone who is, in fact, working in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if like a mental break like that would somehow get ruled out.
No, it wouldn't get ruled out. That would be a counterexample, right? Now, if it turns out that that constitutes a mental break, that's insanity. I don't know if there are such cases, right? So, I mean,
Yeah, I don't either. It's hypothetical.
but if there were such a case, that would be a counterexample. Then it would be a dismissible counterexample if it were a product of madness, right? If this is their brain, messed up, this is their brain on drugs, or if this is some kind of aberration neurophysiologically, then I would say then we don't need to be concerned about it. But if this is the case in a neurotypical, and a person who's perfectly normal and healthy, they just happen to have a pile of false beliefs that results in them being motivated in a radically different way, then I would say, yeah, that constitutes a counterexample. It's not. Now this is no longer universal. It might still be the best account of what we mean by morality, but it would no longer be universal. I happen to think it's universal. But even if it weren't universal...
Hold on. It's not just that you happen to think it's universal. You are saying that that's a fact and that it can be empirically proven or, because it can be falsified. Not proven.
It's empirically
right?
supportable. It's empirically defensible.
Okay, but so before, I don't want to go off air with people thinking that I think that your system is a bunch of crap. I think it's really good. Right? So, and I think probably most people are kind of like that. I'm just saying that you want to bridge, you want to use these things, you want to claim that they're literally empirical, but yet as we've explained this whole time, I disagree with you about that, because I think that there's a construing going on, which makes the initial sort of assumption unfalsifiable. Right, so I would want for you, right, to admit that it's not much different than any other kind of moral system, and that you are nonetheless, just like everybody else, down to having to fight and having to argue for your position over any others, rather than being able or feeling confident or comfortable in literally saying people are literally wrong. And that's sort of the quibble that I've got here. So I love the theory. I think it's a great theory. I don't like that you want to give it power that I don't see it has.
Okay. With respect to one has to argue the case, yeah, I think one has to argue the case whether it's a fact or not. I mean, if you think, in any scientific theory, whether it's right or wrong, you still have to argue for it, right? It's just any ordinary empirical fact. You have to argue for it. So the fact that I'm saying, hey, listen, I think that this is actually the case. I think that this is in fact at bottom what motivates us, and more relevantly, what it is we're trying to talk about, and what determines our judgments about right and wrong is a concern for flourishing and well-being. Just semantically, that this is what best captures what we're talking about. I'm not saying that this is something for which one need make no argument. Of course one has to make an argument. I'm here making the argument.
Right.
So of course one has to make the argument, no matter what. But the fact that I have to make an argument doesn't mean that I shouldn't go around saying that I think it's a fact. I think it's a fact. If I didn't think it was a fact, I wouldn't believe it. I mean, I believe this to be true. What it means to believe something is to think that it's the case. Right? I happen to think it's the case, and I think that everything speaks for it, and I can't find evidence against it. Now, the really strong objection that you're putting forward here is this business of construal. Are you not merely construing or interpreting everything as if a person is striving for flourishing and well-being?
Yes.
And, well, how are we going to determine whether that is in fact the correct construal of what's going on or not? Is it a mere incorrect construal, or is it the right construal? the way you have to do that, I think, is you have to look at all the other things, all the other ways you could construe it, and see, is there a better way to construe things? And I don't think there is, and I think that the reason there isn't a better way to construe it is because when you press people, as I said, when you press people on their reasons, on their motivations, they always go back to that, right? And I don't think that's even a surprise. I mean,
yeah, no, I would agree. I agree.
So in that sense, I don't think it's arbitrary. I don't think it's arbitrary. I don't think it's just, you could just as easily have a different starting point.
Sure, I agree.
You could have a different starting point, but I don't think you can defend the other starting points as readily as this one. I think this is a starting point which I think more readily admits of confirmation and is harder to disconfirm, but it's not hard to imagine disconfirming instances. It's just hard to find them. Right?
I think it might be harder than you might be willing to grant me.
Okay.
In my opinion, it would be very difficult, right? So we can imagine, a small culture that thinks that the genocide of everybody else except for the people who believe whatever foundational belief they have is the right thing to do, right? And I would say that's immoral, right?
Sure.
But and you would say yes, that's immoral.
Yeah, completely.
But you would say, if you really pay attention, they are interested in flourishing down at the bottom.
Yeah. It's just that they're
just wrong.
Yeah, they're mistaken about what actually will constitute flourishing.
Yes,
yeah.
These hypothetical facts that would literally lead to flourishing based on our biology, etc. Right?
Just like the religious person thinks that I am mistaken in my views, and that the real flourishing is to be achieved by being in right relationship with God.
So if you're in a position where you need to argue that a society that finds it moral to kill everybody else is nonetheless Jeez, I just lost what I was trying to get at. God damn it.
Yeah, they're still doing it for the best outcome of what they think should be. It would still be under flourishing.
Right. So there's a couple of things, right? So of what worth is that system? But really, that's not the thing that bothers me. Really, the thing that bothers me is that anything I present to you, you're going to just say, well, that's at bottom flourishing.
Well, no,
right?
No. I present some counterexamples to me, and I'll tell you. I mean, Xbox gave one right off the top of his head, and I went, yeah, that would be a counterexample. So it seems to me it's uncharitable to say to assume that I would always be able to construe it and twist things in such a way that my view comes out right. I mean, I was just given an example that I'd never heard of. For all I know, Xbox could say, yeah, I can give you 50 case studies of exactly this, and then I would say, okay, there you go. So much for the universalism that I was positing, right? It would stand refuted. People like to invoke masochism as a example. But you know the reasons why that doesn't work. But
yes.
But
that's so another one, right? Let's stick with the deity idea, right? So the deity idea doesn't qualify.
The what idea?
The idea of this deity, right? That
right.
So a person who believes that this deity is sort of ultimately good, and so if encountered with a situation where, using his own reasoning, he wouldn't do X, superseding that is this other assumption that the deities say. It's
not an assumption. I really want to take exception to that.
Okay.
I'm not merely assuming this. Okay. If you're talking to a person who says that ultimately obedience to God is the summum bonum, is the ultimate good, right? Acting in accordance with the divine will. Okay.
Right.
If you ask them, if you press them, and you say, okay, well, hang on a second. Suppose the divine will was that everybody just suffer agony for everybody, right? I mean, just imagine the maximum amount of suffering for the greatest number of people for the greatest amount of time.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Imagine that. Supposing that God willed that, would that be a good God? And then they'll tell you, no, that wouldn't be a good God, and God would never will that. Well, why wouldn't God will that? That wouldn't be good. Oh, really? Why wouldn't it be good? Why would that be a crappy God to worship, right? Why would that be an evil God? Why would we be in the hands of a demonic, infernal creature if that was the creator of the universe, right? And it turns out when you, oh, well, that would be awful for us. Yes, it would be awful for us if we were in the hands. If this is what this God wanted, right? We should not want to want that, okay? And you can discover this by talking to them about it, right? So it doesn't matter that they say this is the highest good. You can always ask them, well, wait a minute, what makes that the highest good? And then if they say, well, it just is, and then you say, okay, then you present them with a hypothetical. Imagine that this is what your God would want. Then they'll tell you right off, oh no, God would never want that. Why not? Well, that wouldn't be a good God. You're right, that wouldn't be a good God. What wouldn't make it good? What would be a wrong-making quality about this? What is so wrong-making about a God that wants this and wills this, right? You can always ask of the God and His will, what makes what it is about God's will a right-making property? What is right-making about what God wants? That's a perfectly legitimate question, right?
Sure.
You can ask me, if I say that such and such, giving money to charity is a good thing. It's perfectly legitimate to say what's good about giving to charity, right? I can give you reasons why I think there's something good about it, right? The theist who believes in divine command theory wants to, or in the divine nature, as a summum bonum, is going to tell you that it's because it's in accordance with God's will. But then you can always ask of God's will, what's so good about God's will, right? What makes God's will good? That's not an illegitimate question, and they are usually not unwilling to answer. Some of them get a little savvy. They've had this rug pulled out from under them, and they'll just stop and say, no, there's no other answer. There's no other answer.
Okay, so Fabio wanted to bring up something.
Yeah, I actually waited because I ate my fancy dinner. That's why I wasn't able to.
Well, I'm glad you finished it.
Oh yeah, it was quite good. But anyway, so I've listened, I think, the first 10 minutes of the hangout, and then I stepped in. So I don't know if you're already talking about what I'm going to ask, but it seems to be, and I'm not saying I disagree, but it seems to be that all this idea it's based on a. Okay, let me ask a question, because I really don't know. Is your idea based on a general consensus of the society of what is flourishing in that particular period, or in that particular society, or is there something different? Because I have a follow-up question depending on the answer.
Okay, no, I think that flourishing is a concept like health. It's open-ended and it's objective. We don't get to decide what flourishing is, but we get to discover it. Now, at any given period in history, people will have ideas about what constitutes flourishing, just like at any given period in history or any given culture right now in the world, people will have different ideas about what constitutes health and what you ought to do to be healthy and what medicine consists of in light of that, right? So practical ethics is sort of like the application of your understanding of what constitutes happiness, well-being, and flourishing, and medicine is the practical application of what constitutes your concept of health. But your concept of health is open-ended. We discover what constitutes health. It's open-ended. We don't get to decide it. But it's certainly true that at any given point in history, in any given culture, people have ideas about what is right and wrong and flourishing and all that. And that is the starting point. It's not the end point, but it's the starting point from which we begin our investigation into what is the meaning of morality. What are we talking about? What is at bottom here, right? Well, you have to start, but not end with, what are people talking about when they're talking, when they're engaged in moral talk? What do they seem to what does it always come back to? And to my mind, it always comes back to the virtues, and the virtues are not arbitrary. They all seem to have to do with that which conduces to flourishing and well-being, broadly construed, not sort of narrow happiness moment to moment or anything like that, but the life well lived, right? The kind of life where on your deathbed you could look back and go, that was a good life, right? It could have been a lot worse, or it could have been better if I had done this, that, and the other thing. So I hope that answers your question. It's
no,
I
mean, no, it is interesting. I don't know if you recall, but I think many months ago we had some snippet of a conversation, me and you, and we're slightly talking about sustainability, and now at least I mean, I brought out the issue, but we were, I think, in agreement. that should be one of the factors that we should consider when talking about morals and other things. So still, I understand what you say, but I see. I think there are many dangers in not what you're proposing. I understand it's not a proposal. You're basically, I think you're stating something that you actually see, so it's hardly a proposal. But I think the dangers are quite intrinsic, in the very same idea. I mean, I have example of society which had, and I'm not talking about past society. I'm not talking about Sparta, for example. Okay, I'm talking about really closest society to us, which had what we will still think they had higher standards. They were at the top of the Western civilization. They had a profound and deep philosophical and psychological understanding, of how the society thrives and what is good for the society. Still, they pushed up the ideas which we will find immoral right now. And I'll just make one example. There is it was a movement. It was a program called Action Tiergandestrasse 4. Was Action T4. It was basically a program in Germany which basically said, okay, we take all the mentally unstable people, we put them in asylums, and then we kill them. This is something that we now see as immoral. It's something that we have really big problems, in trying to justify that. But still, the fact that that happened in that time in that particular region of Europe, it had all the justification. They would probably have given you all the proper justification in order for them to justify that program as a really flourishing program. They really increased the race. They really increased what their idea was of a proper society and what would the society would be flourishing. And then I quit. But and keep in mind that I'm not making a historical judgment. I'm trying to look at the society as it was at the time. That was a program which was widely supported by all the society in Germany. So that's why you see I'm saying it. I think I understand what you say, but I see a lot of danger into that. So I think my question would be, how can we avoid to fall back into that kind of trap?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I have some thoughts on that. Okay, I mean, if you think of, eugenics, for instance, is an idea that was very, very popular in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I mean, people were kept out of the United States when they needed to flee Europe, in part on eugenic grounds. We didn't want these morally and intellectually inferior people, these unwashed people coming in here in North America, and all kinds of people died, were reduced to ash because they couldn't escape, because there were eugenics programs in effect. Countless people in the United States were sterilized. People who had cognitive disabilities or were just have very low IQs. Were sterilized so that against their will, right?
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that program of sterilization, it came from the same ideas that that sprouted the Action T4, and it is funny, not too many people know that. I think the U.S. was one of the last countries in the Western world to actually stop that program.
Fabio, if you wanted to respond, but if you do, hold off on it, because I'd like to hear from Francis and Alex, if you have something specific you want to say. So, Francis, you go first if there's something that you were wanting to talk about. Oh, he's in the midst of rejoining. So, how about Alex? Okay. Apparently not. Francis, can you hear us? I'm seeing two Francises. Okay. So much for moderating. So, does anyone respond to what Ozzy just said?
No, I'm actually fine with the answer. You know, if someone wants to jump in anytime, you know, it can do. I'm actually fine with the answer. It's I think one of those things that we have to deal as a human species. You know, the fact that I don't know. It's at least it is my understanding, my belief. You know, that when we're talking about morals, we necessarily have to talk about purges. You know,
About what? Say that again.
About having a purge. You know,
Okay.
so as an organism, you know, and I'm talking about, you know, society as a whole, we might come up with some, you know, with some crazy ideas and crazy understanding of how we think the things should be working and what we think should be moral. But you know, sometimes again, you know, sometimes a purge is the mechanism by which we understand that what we did, what wasn't, you know, is not anymore accepted. So no, I'm actually fine with that. Just to fill you the blanks, Helena. So
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have anything to say? Otherwise, we'll close out.
let's see.
I do, but it's going to constitute another long talk from Ozzy, I'm sure. So it's only if he's up for it and if y'all are up for it.
Well, real quick, it looks like Francis may have made it back in. Let's see if he wants to say anything.
Please.
Hey, Francis.
Here he is. I see him. Hi. Nice to meet you, by the way. Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, I think he's maybe having a problem on his end.
Yeah, it sounds like there may be some technical problems. All right, so yes.
Ah, great. And I'd like to do you the favor of turning my camera off. Actually, I just joined in because I thought it was a listening link, and it just kind of joined me in here. So you guys either remind me of what the subject is, or go on so that I can catch up.
The basic subject is that I was claiming that at the root of Ozzy's seems to me, at least so far in what I've been watching and reading, somewhat quirky version, although Ozzy, I could be wrong, of moral realism is an assumption that Ozzy thinks is very clearly an empirical matter. And I was challenging him on that. I don't see it as an empirical matter because I think that there is a construence problem. So that's sort of the reason I, you know, sort of brought up the whole hangout. But at this point...
So are you suggesting that morality is based... please excuse me, I'll join back in a sec.
Okay.
Actually, Helen, it occurs to me if you need to get going, or if you wanted to take it off air, we could always take it off air. We could just, you know, we could keep talking off air.
Okay, yeah. How do we do that? Because that way, because I am looking at the time, and I do have something. It's not, you know, it's not immediate, but it's relatively soon. So somebody tell me how to take it off air. I just click stop broadcast.
Yeah, that's all you have to do.
Okay, so I'm clicking stop broadcast. Ozzy, thank you. Everybody, thank you.
Thank you,
it's still going to be going on, and you can still join. It's just going to be off air because I think that's sort of the main issue that I was at least interested in has been covered, and I got my first hangout done. So, all right, bye everybody, and thank you very much. And we're going off air right now, I believe.